Hi everybody, Meteorologist Joel Curtis here with your marine forecast. Forecast issued Friday, August 15th. Starting out with our ice edge, not much to talk about there. Ice continues to melt. We are not at our season low yet. Looking ahead at Saturday's weather. First of all, we have a 995 millibar low down off at Dixon Entrance. The strongest differences in pressure are over in the western Gulf, looking at Prince William Sound, Kennedy Entrance, and off of Kodiak Island, including Shelikof Strait and a little bit off the Alaska Peninsula. In the meantime, there is a weak cold front moving through the Bering Strait. All it's doing really is spreading some precipitation onto the western coasts. 1023 millibar high over the Bering Sea and 1015 millibar low well south of the far western Aleutians, with a little bit of a warm front for some precipitation moving northward. Now on Sunday, sea held low. The pressure is inland, a weak, 1006, 1007, and then there's a 1007 low out in the Gulf of Alaska. That doesn't mean much pressure gradient, therefore not a whole lot of wind on Sunday. Also, that weak cold front proceeds east across the northern sections, spreading precipitation, but notice that there's just not a lot of those black lines on the map, which is really going to cause a lot of wind. So very benign weather pattern that we're in right now. So let's get started with our marine forecast for Southeast Alaska. Starting out, for Clarence Strait, we have southeasterlies, gale force up to 35 knots, seas up to 6 feet. And then we have northerlies on the rest of the inside, 10 to 15 knots, seas up to 3 feet. On the outside waters, a little bit of offshore flow, 10 to 20 knots from Baranof Island down to Prince of Wales Island. And then seas up to about 6 feet. And then from Cape Spencer on up to Cape Suckling, 5 to 10 knots and seas up to 5 feet. There'll be a residual swell there. And then on Sunday, winds lighten up somewhat. We've got pretty much southerlies on the inside waters, except for Lynn Canal. Winds up to 15 knots, seas up to 3 feet. And then on the outside waters, we've got a little bit of southerlies. That could be also a little bit of a sea breeze going there, up to 20 knots, seas 7 feet. And then we have some outflow winds, 10 to 15 knots from Cape Spencer on up to Cape Suckling, seas up to 6 feet. Some of that will be a little bit of a southwest swell. So for our south central forecast, we have generally northerlies on the east side, 20 to 30 knots, seas up to 5 feet on the outside, and 3 feet for Prince William Sound. Northerlies 20 knots in Cook Inlet, seas up to 5 feet. And then as you get down to Kennedy Entrance, what you've got is gale force 35 knots, northwesterlies, and seas up to around 8 feet. And then for Sunday, winds back off a little bit. 15 knots, seas 3 feet in Prince William Sound. Up to 20 knots, generally a northerly component, 15 to 20 knots, and seas 3 feet. Not a lot of fetch distance there, so the seas aren't big and the swells aren't from that direction. And then we have in Cook Inlet, northerlies 15 knots, seas up to 3 feet, but then down for Kennedy Entrance, small craft advisory 30 knots, and seas up to 6 feet. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, pretty good northwesterlies going on. 25 knots through Shelikof Strait, seas 5 feet. Off of Kodiak Island, 30 knots, seas 6 feet. Down by Sitkinak, gale force 35 knots, seas 6 feet. And then 15 to 20 knots for the lesser Alaska Peninsula. Seas up to 4 feet for Bristol Bay, and up to 3 feet or so down off of Sandpoint and False Pass. And then on Sunday, those northwesterlies back off a little bit. First of all, for Shelikof Strait, westerly 20 knots, seas 4 feet. down off of Kodiak Island, 25 knots, seas up to 5 feet. For Bristol Bay, 15 knots, seas 3 feet. And then as you get down further down the Alaska Peninsula, down off of Unimak Island, we've got variable winds 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Now get a load of this for the Aleutian chain. We do have winds, variable directions, 10, a little bit of 15 knots down off of Amchitka, seas 6 feet there. Otherwise, 3 to 4 feet just about everywhere. And then, what do you know, on Sunday, pretty darn light winds with that domineering high pressure system. Winds variable 10 knots, seas 2 to 3 feet on the Bering Sea side and up to 4 feet on the Pacific side. Now for the west coast, got a westerly component in most of the winds, except for the Pribilofs, variable winds 10 knots, seas 3 feet. So 15 to 20 knots down through Bristol Bay, southwesterlies 20 knots off of St. Matthew, otherwise westerlies 10 to 15 knots from Norton Sound on down to Cape Romanzoff and seas about 3 feet. And then for Sunday, again, generally westerly component, except for the Pribilofs. We've got an easterly 15 knots and seas 3 feet. Has to do with that high pressure where it is exactly. And then for St. Matthew Island, southwesterlies 20 knots, seas 5 feet. Otherwise, just generally westerlies 10 to 15 knots and seas up to about 3 feet. For the Arctic coast, we have, except for off of Kaktovik, westerlies 15 knots, seas 3 feet, generally southerly component to the winds, ranging from 10 to 20 knots, 20 knots in the Chukchi Sea, seas 4 feet, otherwise 10 to 15 knots or so and seas up to about 3 feet. And then on Sunday, things really lighten up and pretty variable in the wind directions. Winds around 10 knots and seas up to about 3 feet. Some southwesterlies creeping into the Bering Strait. So that's it for your marine forecast. I do want to mention again that marine weather statement for debris in Stevens Passage from the Glacier Lake outburst flooding, and that's through at least tonight, probably going to last into tomorrow too. So let somebody know where you're boating or file a float plan, and please stay safe out there. Thank you.